We're back with more mechanics, the top 90 mechanics of all time now. If you didn't check out the first 60, go check out those 3 videos. We are here with 90 to 81, where we are both defining and ranking the best mechanics of all time. So if you've ever wondered what every mechanic is or how is a board game constructed, Board Game Geek breaks down the individual mechanics and mechanisms of a game and gives them a nice little title. And I realized that I didn't know anything about what a lot of these did, so I figured I'd research them and look into them and define them for everybody so that we can operate on a common vernacular, as I'm sure you've heard this intro pitch multiple times now having tuned into this series. So I'm gonna scrap the pitch. You know what it's all about. You know why I'm doing this. Let's just get into talking about some cool, fun mechanics. And starting off with number 90, which is the bingo mechanic. And this is actually what I'm really excited to talk about. Like a lot of them, I'm excited to talk about. But this one in particular is something that I didn't know how to define before looking into this list. Because if you tuned into the previous iterations of this series, you'll know that when we came across line drawing, I think, or paper and pencil, I believe that was it, I mentioned how I was expecting paper and pencil to be the roll and write mechanic, or the fact that there isn't even under the mechanics a section for roll and write. It's actually a little link in this bingo. It says mechanism, roll and write, which I'm not even going to unpack. I'm going to keep on saying mechanic because I also think it's funny that each one of these is a specific mechanic coming to fix your board gaming needs. But the bingo mechanic, I wish I could come up with a little image for every single one, but we'll just call our buddy Bingo and we'll be done with that.
Bingo was his
section.
name of.
We'll be done with that rabbit hole.
Well, maybe I'll go catch me some rabbits.
No. Is basically what I've always interpreted roll and writes to be, but it is a core element to a roll and write, which is there is a thing. It's either a dice or it's a flipped card or a number that is turned up for everyone and everyone gets to use it in their own way. So Welcome To is an example of this. There'll be 3 numbers that are flipped up and you get to take, one of them or combine them or whatever and use it in your own board however you would like. And I like this a lot as a concept. I like seeing what everybody else does with a specific thing. And I also like having a better language to describe roll and writes and flip and writes, and it has helped me identify the thing that I do enjoy about roll and writes and flip and writes, and how can I find that in other games, and that is this specific bingo mechanic. I don't care that you're writing things on a sheet. I like that everybody gets the thing, and it's how you use the thing that is interesting and exciting. And so that's cool. Where bingo falters for me, which is why it's, not in the top, it's only sitting at number 90, I think this could lead to some predictability, or this could lead to everyone knowing that, yeah, you have to apply this specific number in this spot. Usually there's enough of a decision space where that's not gonna happen, but you can run into the risk of everyone playing the same game in a sense. And that's where I see the potential pitfalls for the bingo mechanic. And so it stays at a comfortable number 90, but of course it's in the top 90, better than the top 100. And it's cool. And I like that I know that I have this knowledge now, and now you do too. Now, number 89 is a mechanic called Induction. And this is one that I, again, didn't have the vocabulary to determine, but I have played before, and I've played it in a game called Mao. And the basic rules of Induction, Mao is just a card game. It is that there is a game master who knows all the rules, and the players who have to figure the rules out. So it's different than deduction, it's induction, where you're trying to create patterns and then figure out if that's even allowed or if it's even a rule. So Mao, if you know how to play Mao, you'll just start playing and no one will know how to play except the person playing, and they will give penalties to people when they break rules. And there are a lot of rules, like one, no talking, and you'll get dealt a card penalty every time. And I love this as an experience. I really do. It can be frustrating for a lot of people, but I just think this as a concept is so fun. And the reason it's sort of lower, honestly, it should be higher up on the list because I think the experience of figuring this thing out I find so enjoyable, but it's lower on the list because it creates more of a one-shot scenario. You have to keep on introducing it to different groups in order for things to really change, or for you to get to relive that experience again. I remember learning Mao as a kid at summer camp, and then we played it all the time. Even though we all knew the rules by the end of it, we just kept on playing it because sometimes we get someone who didn't know the rules and then get to introduce them to it as well. And it's this weird thing that happens when people know the rules and they're just obeying these weird rules. And from an outsider point of view, I suppose that's what most games look like. It's just learning a game without actually getting to be taught the rules. It's making a game out of being taught the rules, almost. I suppose you could do that with almost any game and you just don't tell people, but there's some satisfying way of when you use that as a central mechanic, it's satisfying to uncover the rules and to tell people. Now, again, it is lower too because some people hate it, and it really might frustrate someone, or they might feel like they're getting picked on or whatever, so it is very group applicable. But honestly, it makes me want to try out some of these games that are listed, like Zendo, Visitor in Blackwood Grove, Eleusis, Rosetta the Lost Language. Even Mastermind is on here because, in essence, one person knows the actual solution and it's just feeding the little bits of information. Although I would sort of clarify Mastermind as deduction instead of induction. I think that would probably be a little bit misclassified because you are told the rules. You know that a green peg means it's in the right spot, and a yellow peg means it's the right color, but it's not in the right spot. It's Wordle, right? That's what Wordle's based off of, is Mastermind. And so by knowing the rules, I think it falls more into deduction versus induction, but the idea of induction, well, you know, it gets me excited. Anyway, that's part of this series, is me getting excited and wanting to talk about these mechanics and these experiences. And it's kind of cool to relive, and it's cool to relive your experiences and see what actual specific thing, when you break it down piece by piece, maybe that's just my analytical brain that's interested in this, but I think it's an interesting exercise to really isolate the thing that caused you to have the most fun, because then you are able to figure out what other things might provide you a greater amount or equal amount of fun as well. So that's enough on induction. It really should be higher. But again, this list is infallible, it's unchangeable, and hand management is again at 127. Moving along, we have critical hits and failures. And if you've played any role-playing game, you probably know what this is. You will generally roll the dice, and if you hit a really hard number to hit, you will get a critical hit. Or if you hit another really hard number to hit, like a 1, you'll get a critical failure, and something good or something bad will happen to you. You'll see this in a lot of skirmish games. Townsfolk Tussle, I hit a 10, and then I rolled it again. I was like, yes, I can't wait to see what special effect happens, what results will occur from this awesome hit that I just did. And then I rolled a 1, and it was like, no, you just slip and fall and punch yourself in the face. I was like, oh, fantastic. But the reason why I don't mind critical hits and failures, they're never going to be top tier. I think this is mid-tier for me as well in terms of a mechanic, is because they can provide really high highs and really low lows, but they are sort of based around this dice rolling and random chance. My friend Zach, who has been on the channel numerous times, he loves critical hits and failures, because if there's any chance that you can go on a Death Star run, Zach will attempt to go on that Death Star run. He will attempt to do the impossible, roll the dice in the exact way that needs to happen, and it can make for an exciting experience as you try to get these critical hits, and they're not going to come up that often. Some might say 5% of the time, but depending on the dice. But when they do happen, it creates these lovely moments around the table, which I can really appreciate. But it's not something that I actively will strive to have included in my game. So that's why it's sitting at this 88 level. I appreciate what it does, but, you know, I'm never going to look up. It's not something I'm going to look up and then seek out in my games, personally. Now, next up in 87, we have a finale ending. And this is when the game ends, a special mini-game is played to affect the end game victory condition. And this is a really interesting one, because if you checked out 100 to 91, the sudden death ending kind of feels like this, but there's definitely a distinction between the two, because in a sudden death ending, in one of the implementations of it, if there is a tie, you then play this mini game. In the finale ending, it doesn't matter if there's a tie or not. It's if a certain situation happens, you do this minigame. So the best example of this is the Resistance Avalon, which if you haven't played it, it's a social deduction game similar to Mafia Werewolf. There are two teams, good and bad. But the good team has a special character, Merlin, who knows who all the bad players are. And so at the end of the game, if good has won, the bad team has one last chance to pick which of the good members was Merlin. And if they pick correctly, the bad team wins, just outright. And it wipes out anything that the good team accomplished, because presumably Merlin didn't hide well enough. And Merlin was too overt in saying, yep, those two people are bad, I'm Merlin. And then the bad team was just able to kill them. So it exists as this balancing factor to make sure that it's still fair while adding in that extra roll. And it always happens as this finale ending if good wins, versus the sudden death ending where it'll only happen in a tie. You'll do this extra special minigame. And I like this finale ending. I see its pros and cons, which is why it is sitting where it is in the mechanics list, because at one hand, I like that it can serve as a balancing act. I love that it can serve as this extra special thing that happens right at the end that could turn the tide of history. And then on the other hand, it can be like, yeah, okay, it just wipes out everything that we did, and why did we even bother playing the game in the first place? So I can see the balances between the two. I personally enjoy it. I like that it's in this mid-tier level, but again, that's why it is at number 87 on the best mechanics of all time. Another implementation of this is Mysterium, for example. You go through the whole game to build up to this finale ending, and you have to get that thing right in order to win the game. So you're clawing your way up, and it's just a different switch of something that happens to make the game feel different. It doesn't have to exist as a balancing mechanic. It just has to exist as something different where you must accomplish it or you will not win the game. So I like it. I definitely like it. But again, I like board games. I don't know if you could tell. Number 86 is Rerolling and Locking. And this is the age-old mechanic of Yahtzee. You're going to have that many games have taken from and have implemented into their systems. You're going to have a set of dice, you're going to roll them, and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to keep that one, and I get to re-roll a certain amount. So you're in essence pushing your luck a little bit, or trying to create patterns with your dice, playing with the probability of what you do re-roll and what you don't. King of Tokyo has this in their game as well, where maybe you rolled a bunch of claws, but you really were trying to get hearts. So do you take the bird in the hand, or do you take the two in the bush? Obviously, the two in the bush, there's more there. What could go wrong? They're never going to fly away and hear you. No. Take the two in the bush every time. I like that this exists as a mechanic and has been adopted by so many games because I think it helps mitigate that randomness of dice rolling. You can still have the joy of dice rolling. You can still have that random element, those highs and those lows of getting that perfect roll. But then you also have the chance to get another one and not just be resigned to one bad roll. You actually have to have 3 bad rolls, and you make the best of this randomly generated set of things or icons, and then you have to deal with it. And so I think it is a really slick mechanic that I love has been pulled from an old game that was just that mechanic and is now implemented into a number of different things. And I think we'll continue to see it being implemented for a long time, honestly, because it's a great way of mitigating that randomness in the dice rolling area. Now, number 85 is the hidden movement mechanic. And this is a fun one. This is also, I feel, a contentious one. For me, it's in the lower half of my favorite mechanics, because remember, I took 150 of them and ranked them, and so it's still 85 means bottom half. But it's close to that middle ground because I love it in concept, and I like keeping track of things in my head, but it's not something that I'm always going to gravitate towards. And so hidden movement is very simple. Things like Scotland Yard, Fury of Dracula, Star Wars Rebellion and War for the Ring also have this. You have someone who's jotting down where they're moving and the other players or player trying to figure out where they actually ended up moving to. So they're able to run across the board and they will appear at moments in time and then run around as well. If Burn Cycle were a competitive game, the bots would probably have hidden movement until the security guards saw them and you'd see their spot where they went. And so what's really interesting about this and what Board Game Geek references is that the key to making this a success is to make the hidden movement paths easy to figure out. Not necessarily to figure out, but to trace back. Or as the player, not making it too complicated that you can jump 2 and then zigzag 1 and then move up 1. No, it's usually going to be, okay, I move from this line to this line, and you jot it down. And then that way you can really reverse engineer things and see what happened at the end of the game. And I like that for that reveal at the end, and you can then talk about the things that happened and said, oh yeah, actually it was right over here when you thought you were 1 space away, and then I moved and then you couldn't catch me. And it can create those really fun moments, but it also can create people who just forget or aren't that good and don't play by the rules and make a mistake by accident, and then, you know, the game's useless. Well, it's not useless. You all had fun, but you weren't playing by the same set of rules, and so therefore it wasn't very fair. It wasn't a fair contest. It wasn't a fair battle of wits. So yeah, hidden movement I think is a solid mechanic, but it's not something that I'm always going to gravitate towards, even though I won't shy away from it. I know my girlfriend in particular, she despises hidden movement. That's probably 150 for her, honestly, because she finds it really hard to wrap her brain around visualizing where things go. She's a real visual person, and so she needs to physically feel and visualize the things. And she'll lose track with her ADHD. She'll lose track of where she was, and she just won't have a fun experience. So I think I'm cognizant of that, which pushes it a bit lower for me. But for my own personal preference, I think it's a middle ground mechanic, and I won't shy away from it. But my favorite use of hidden movement, honestly, is Nuns on the Run, because that theme is so funny, of the little nuns sneaking around the abbey at night, and the 2 abbesses with their flashlights trying to see who's sneaking out from their dormitory to go get a letter from a boy or something. That's a pretty fun game. And speaking of easy movement, next up at 84 we have point-to-point movement. And that is, again, as the name suggests. Sometimes there's not much defining needed to be done. Sometimes it's fairly easy to understand these terms. Sometimes there's actually a little bit more than you expect. But the key here is that there is a line from a point to a point. That means you can move from that point to that point. Doesn't matter how close they are to something else. If there's no line indicating you can move that way, you can't move in that direction. It's a meat and potatoes sort of mechanic. It is a building block of game proportions. It is an integral part to a lot of games, an unsung hero that it doesn't really get talked about. And so yeah, it's going to be middle ground because I don't really have an opinion on it. Honestly, it exists in this realm because I think, well, I like this more and I don't like that as much. And to be honest, it's a very hard one to define why you would enjoy point-to-point movement or why you wouldn't enjoy point-to-point movement. This for me also encompasses the other mechanic, area movement, which is just you have an area, and if it's touching another area, like Risk, you can move from one area to the other. Risk, Small World, it's the same sort of standard movement that most people can grasp. There's not too much to say about it. I'm desperately trying to fill time as I grasp at straws as to why it's even included on this list, because sometimes I cut a few of the other sort of standard basic building blocks. But I think what I enjoy, and I found it, there we go, found it, just talk long enough and you'll find it. I think what I enjoy is, oh, I lost it. No, just kidding. I think what I enjoy is the fact that it is sort of route planning. When you have these predefined lines, you can determine your routes that you want to take. You can determine the efficiency of your actions, and there's a level of pre-planning that exists that is easy for people to pick up on and easy to map out. So that's what I'm going with. That's point-to-point movement, and you know what? And area movement. We'll get another one in. 151 mechanics! Look at us! Go. Number 83 on the top mechanics of all time are scenario or mission or campaign games. These games have a set of rules that exists everywhere, and then you have various scenarios that you apply those rules to. Any dungeon crawler is a scenario or a mission game or a campaign game. Gloomhaven is this, Massive Darkness is this, Zombicide is this. Anytime you will set up the board in a modular way, and it'll give you that set setup with different items and doors and traps and whatever, and you play that scenario and you take the outside things like different character classes, that's a scenario game. And I'm surprised and also not surprised that it's down here. I'm not driven to purchase scenario-based games, and it's a weird thing. I think it speaks to my enjoyment for modularity, And the fact that a scenario game will give you a set of 10 scenarios, it feels like it has a finite lifespan. And I know that's not the case because you can play these scenarios over again and still enjoy them. It's not like you've uncovered the secret. It's not usually like a story-based game unless it is a campaign game. But even still, there is that modularity in the outside factors and the external factors that happens. And yet, there's still that part of me which shies away from purchasing them because they're often a larger price point and they're often that smaller replayability. But then I take something like Massive Darkness 2, which I've really been enjoying as of late, and think that it's a scenario-based game. I'm like, yeah, I want to do the next scenario, and I want to do the next scenario. And often, well, not often, but sometimes companies, at least CMON will, this is the one great thing that they do, is that they will release additional supplementary scenarios, or you can just create your own, because when it comes down to it, you're just smashing things together and throwing in some villains and just having a good time. So I see the possibilities of the scenario-based game, and I like that it is a modular setup every time, but I also feel the restraints of the scenario-based game, and I know my own personal bias is that I will be less inclined to continue to play it unless I really, really enjoy it. Once I've worked my way through those scenarios, it kind of puts that completionist boop on the end, and I say, okay, I finished that game. Like, I beat it. And I don't necessarily want that out of my games. I want continued play from every single one of them all the time, forever, until I die. Which, you know, I don't think is too much to ask. Now, number 82 is once per game abilities. And this is, again, as it sounds, you have a specific thing that you can do only once per game, and you have to choose when to do that thing. This could be twice per game abilities. These could be thrice per game abilities. I'm thinking of Ticket to Ride Europe, where you actually have those little stations that you can put onto the board. As long as there is a finite amount of times you can use this ability, I think it falls into this category of once per game abilities, basically. Or at least that's kind of how I see it being defined as, because it is a finite thing. You're not going to use necessarily more than once, and you often get victory points for it if you don't end up using. Although that's not a prerequisite to actually fall into this category. And I like abilities. I like powers and abilities. I like being able to have a cool thing that you get to do. I think the reason I like this and I dislike it is because you do often get those victory points if you don't use it. I'm not going to use it. If it's something like Sagrada, where you can use the abilities or not, you have these little tokens that you can use on them. I'm probably not going to use them because I want to save it for points. And things that give me an incentive not to use them when I could have more fun using them, it doesn't feel great, but I know I want to win, so I will try to not use those things because getting the points does feel great. So it's this interesting trade-off. I would prefer that you have consistent abilities for me personally, but that's a little bit further up on the list. But I also think it adds in a nice little flavor of when are you going to use that special thing, especially in a game that takes like an hour to 2 hours to 3 hours. If you have that one little burst of the perfect opportune time of using that one special thing, it just feels great. And finally, bringing us home to number 81 on the best mechanics of all time, we have dice rolling. Dice rolling doesn't make the top half, but it is so close, really in this middle ground for me. And it's pretty simple. You'll find dice rolling in a lot of games. You take some dice and you roll them. There we go. The definition point of this mechanic is done. I have, again, a really weird relationship with dice rolling. It's fun to do. It's sometimes fun to just grab dice and chuck them. And honestly, my heart would probably push this a little bit further up, but it's my head and my desire for really thinky, tactical, strategic games that lessens it a little bit and diminishes the actual power that dice rolling can have on the game and on the fun of a game, really. Because it is fun, there is a sense of unknown when you are rolling dice. Like the critical rolls and the critical failures, dice rolling gets to be higher than that mechanic because the actual act of rolling the dice is the thing that is fun. And not just if you get a 10 or a 1, but if you get a 7 or a 3. And the randomness that is associated with that is baked into the game that you cannot control. And you can prepare as much as you want. You can really prepare, and then you can just have a few bad rolls and lose based off of that. And that provides a sense of not taking the game too seriously. That provides a sense of fun. I think you'll find a lot of the Ameritrash games that have dice in them versus the Euros which don't have dice in them, that are pure strategy, perfect information. You're gonna have more fun, like actual fun and laughs and moments because of the dice versus not having them. But if you're interested in a strategic game or a strategic experience, which I usually am, having a primary mechanism be dice rolling makes it a little bit too random for me. I don't mind the probability aspect or the calculation of things in things like Yahtzee, which is that lock and roll, and it is just dice rolling. It's just dice rolling as a mechanic. Or rather, craps is dice rolling as a mechanic. You roll some dice, you see what happens. That's the mechanic, and craps has never really interested me because I don't have that control. And so while I appreciate the moments and I'm happy that it exists, and I don't dislike dice rolling by any means, it still isn't this middle ground for me because it can just come down to a roll of the dice. And sometimes you want that and sometimes you don't. So that's why it's clocking in at number 81 for me. Anyway, that's numbers 90 to 81. If you came from the previous video, or the previous videos, we've now gone from 150 up to 81. That's 70 board game mechanics that we have covered, and it's kind of cool. I mean, I say this all the time. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but drop in the comments below how you're enjoying this. I'm going to try to wrap this series up as quickly as I can and put out, you know, really do the countdown, because whenever I get back to it, I just really enjoy myself. But of course, I have a lot of other things that I have to accomplish and would like to film as well. So it's trying to find that balance and get back to things that I always want to return to and never have enough time for. Kind of like playing games. But yeah, which out of this batch is the most interesting to you? How do you feel about dice rolling in your games? And that in particular, because there were a lot of dice rolling ones in this one. The critical success and critical failures in here also tie into that. The set and the lock. It was a really dice heavy area, and it's interesting to me that they all sort of fell in the same place, but not that interesting, because it's, again, the limitations of them prevent them from going a little bit further. And so that's why I think dice rolling ended up on top of the other specific ones, because sometimes, yeah, you're gonna chuck some dice. You can do some cool things with dice, but in essence, it's the dice rolling itself that is the thing. That's where I'm standing. That's where I'm at. I'm curious to see if you like dice in your games. If not, or let me know what you think. Let me know what your favorite mechanics are up to this point that we've covered. I don't want to get spoiled on your list as well. Also, I'm curious if anybody can guess my number one. I don't know. I don't know if anyone could. There's a few. Like, you probably know what's going to be my top 10, and the order is going to be a bit different. But yeah, I like my number one. Well, obviously. And I'm excited to keep on doing this series. So hit the like button if you haven't. That helps kind of boost it. And, you know, the more traction this gets, the more I'll be to return to it. I'm just kidding. I'm going to return to it anyway. That's what the support of my patrons is for, is always putting out new stuff. So thank you to everybody who watches the channel, who has subscribed. Again, if you've made it this far, honestly, just please hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out a lot, and I won't be annoying. Or, you know what? I can stop being annoying and asking about the subscribe all the time. When my analytics say that it's not 60% are subscribed, 40% aren't, who have clicked on the video, I can finally stop making these sorts of pitches. So just save you and me all the airtime, and then we can get more content together. Thanks so much for watching. My name's Chris George. I do not have a catchphrase, but I do have a list of the 70 worst mechanics of all time. And soon it will be a list of the 150 worst mechanics of all time, because all mechanics are horrible, they're awful, because it's mechanism. It's board game mechanism. Stop saying it! Okay. Thanks, everybody. This was fun. I hope.